a couple of minutes to get everyone logged in and the recording's just starting. Hi, if you're just joining us, we'll just give it a moment to let everybody get logged in before we kick off. Hello everyone, if you're just joining us, we'll just give everyone a moment to get logged in before we kick off. Great. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's CIPR Scotland event on ethical leadership, which is with Professor Anne Gregory. I'm Sean Bell, and I'm chair of the CIPR Scotland. Now, we will be recording today's session, and we'll make a link available afterwards. This event is going to be worth 5 CIPR ethics CPD points. And if you have any questions during the session today, please submit them using the Q&A function down the bottom. If you do have any thoughts or comments, we'd love to hear them, and you can use our Twitter hashtag of CIPR Scotland events. It's really great to see so many members with us today, and I'm sure you already know this, but the CIPR Scotland brings together a community of over 600 professionals working in the industry, and we're working really hard to support you in your career progression. Today's event is actually part of our Director Skills series, which aims to support the boardroom skills of senior practitioners and mid-level practitioners in the industry. And I think today's topic of ethical leadership is absolutely critical for senior practitioners within the CIPR, but also beyond. As people who influence how society thinks, feels and acts, I believe that we have a responsibility to ask and answer tough ethical questions. And I also think it's really important for us to find ways to continually improve our ethical decision-making and to take the time to reflect on the ethical dilemmas that we encounter in our roles. So I'm really delighted that we're joined today by Professor Anne Gregory. She's chair of corporate communication at the University of Huddersfield and teaches all around the world on public relations, leadership, ethics, planning, evaluation and capability. And that includes work with the UK government and the EU. Anne's also a past president of the CIPR and co-author of the CIPR's Ethics Guide to AI and PR, which you may have read as it was published last year. She's also author of over 100 books, chapters and journal articles, including the very popular book, Planning and Managing Public Relations Campaigns. So thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today. And I'll hand over to you at this point.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And it's great to be with you. What a topic to be dealing with right now, ethical leadership. Just think about 3 things that are front and central for us all at the moment. We've just found out that the rugby league team from Australia and New Zealand are not going to be coming over to participate in the Rugby World Cup. And their motives are not entirely clear. They say it's to keep their players safe, but the sort of undercurrent is, oh no, it's not. It's because they'll have to quarantine when they get home, and their home teams are not happy about that. So big questions about motives. We've got vaccine hesitancy in some communities, and a big reason for that is that those communities, numbers in them, don't trust authority anymore, don't know who to look for authoritative information to. So the idea of, whose benefit is this for is a question that's in their mind. And then there are challenges too around handling coming out of the pandemic, which we're all facing now. And there are issues around, well, do we believe this? Is government competent to actually handle something as big? And those 3 things, which are about leadership, what are the motives? What are leaders asking us to do? Whose benefit is this for? And are they competent as we look at them? Big questions, big ethical questions in leadership. So I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface on some of these topics. And what I want to try to do is stimulate your thinking a little bit in these areas. I'm not going to go into the detail of ethical decision making, but sort of some broad reflections really in three areas. One is around sort of new thinking about leadership. Another is around what lessons can we take from what's happened recently about leadership, and then just looking to sort of new challenges as well, and maybe some thinking about how we as communication leaders might build sort of trust into our leadership, because at the heart of all this, of course, is issues around trust. So what I've been asked to do is to sort of share a few thoughts with you first, and then we can leave time open for questions. So I'm just going to share some slides with you now. And so, topic, ethical leadership, putting ethics into practice. I hope you can see the screen there. Let's just start where we are with the Edelman Trust Barometer. We can see that during the pandemic, there was actually a huge leap in trust initially in May 2020. But since then, it's plummeted again. And in fact, the decrease in trust has happened in all four of the institutions that Edelman measures: government, media, NGOs, and business. 8% loss of trust in government over this last 12 months. But what I wanted to pick out of this specifically was around trust in leaders. And there's been a remarkable decrease in trust in leaders. So Edelman found that 56% of business leaders and 57% of government leaders were thought to have misled the public by saying what they knew to be false or by grossly exaggerating. So at the heart of this dive in trust is ethical leadership. And actually, Edelman went on to suggest, as you probably know, that societal leaders need to learn to lead with facts and with empathy. And the combination of those two, the rational and the emotional, is at the heart of new leadership. And that leaders need to learn that they should lead not just for the benefit of their own organizations, but to find common purpose with those who they serve. And the idea of servant leadership is coming to the fore again. And also that they serve a higher purpose, which is, of course, society. So they shouldn't be looking just to assert their own interests and their own organization's interests, but look to the broader interests of all their stakeholders and society. So if we look then at the drivers for ethical leadership, and just a couple of examples I'll pick out, we know that there's a huge drive from society for organizations to move beyond self-interest, to looking at societal issues and making a contribution to society. And stakeholder expectations now are firmly in that groove. And I've got there Harvey Weinstein. And interesting, actually, a leader who is seen not to be a person of integrity. It can't just be removed from the organization. The whole organization collapsed as a result of him as a leader proving to be unethical, and he's been jailed, so I can say that. As we speak, he's on trial again in California. So it's not just individuals, but whole organizations that depend on ethical leadership. Removing the leader is not just the action that can be taken these days, but also employee expectations are very much in this make a bigger contribution groove, and particularly younger employees at all. And there's a quote here from a chief communication officer from a huge Silicon Valley organizations who says, when we don't speak out externally, we get pushed back internally. And given that employees have choices about who they work for and are exercising those choices, we know that listening to employee voice is becoming increasingly important. Investor expectations, yep, really important now with the ESG agenda, that there's the investment community is forcing a lot of organizations to take a more ethical leadership stance. Now we can make accusations about, well, this is instrumental, because they know that in the long term, organizations are not going to survive if they don't do something about climate change, if they don't do something about their internal governance. But nevertheless, you know, there is an impetus to make that societal contribution. I'll come back to digital transformation in a minute, but I just wanted to focus on investors here. This is Larry Fink's letters to CEOs in 2001. You're probably very aware of this, but I think this is really important. Here's a CEO of the world's largest asset management company. And if I took his picture away, you could say that this was his chief communication officer. Isn't it fascinating? So just take some of those key words: establishing trust, acting with purpose, understanding and responding to changes happening in the broader world, attracting customers and talent, reflecting their values. These are all the things that are in our common narrative at the moment. Is what we do in communication. You know, it is about designing an organizational narrative around purpose. It is about connecting with people. It is about understanding the importance of our internal communication community. Our people are our real assets, and the importance of values. So it's been quite a lot of interesting work done around the issue of values-based leadership. There's a book called The Values Economy by Williams and Williams, and also Mark Carney. You probably know his book called Value, except it's value, quote, S, values and values, and he sees the two being really clear. It's almost as if, you know, we talk about the age of enlightenment a couple of 100 years ago. It's almost as if we're going away from the world of the enlightenment, where reason and rationality was the most highly prized thing. And what Williams and Williams says, decisions are being made in a different way now. Emotions, opinion, and an alignment with personal identity is what is driving decision making for a lot of people, rather than rational choice. And social media means that what others say, particularly what employees say about companies, is more than what the organization says about itself. So marketing campaigns, you know, are blown out of the water by an employee voice that doesn't hold resonance with that. So Brewdog would be a classic example of that. You know, wonderful, wacky, innovative company, but they treat their employees badly. Who's believed? You know, millions of pounds spent in marketing, a few employees saying we're badly treated. So control of the brand is really shifting. And marketing doesn't control branding anymore. Public relations doesn't. It's owned by others, and it's tribal. So we're moving into a completely new landscape. And you know, I work in a business school, and the sort of business orthodoxy, and you're senior people, and so you're perfectly aware of who sits around the board table. The business orthodoxy, you know, me coming from people like Michael Porter, and strategic thinking more generally, is about exercising control, finding your niche, being in control over the environment and over your customers, if you like. And leadership models have been to match, you know, heroic leaders taking control, leading the troops over the top. But actually, this sort of transactional hero model of leadership is very much changing now. And this is moving towards a more sort of servant facilitative leadership mode, which seems to be much more effective. So there are clear implications for leadership, given the context in which we're operating now. And I would say that leadership really is around generating the conditions for success. So that is a leadership role. How do you create the conditions where your organization can be successful? And we have to bear in mind that leadership is an intrinsically manipulative function, really. You know, we want to inspire people to support the purpose of our organization, to work hard, to give their all, to make sure that it's sustainable into the long term. So leadership is manipulative, but manipulation doesn't always mean that it's bad. You know, sometimes you can do things in a way that brings the best out and provides fulfillment for people. So what are these conditions for success? Well, I say first, it's about establishing a clear and supported purpose. And how is that done? It's best done when that purpose is agreed, not just internally and handed down, but it's negotiated. So, and people clearly align with it and they understand it, and people within the organization have some stake in what that purpose is, and that purpose has resonance externally. And, you know, we have a huge role in that, in actually proposing, if you like, what purpose might be and testing whether or not that has relevance and resonance with people. But most importantly, and there's been a huge piece of work actually with the recruitment organizations in Europe over this last year of senior level communicators. What do chief executives want? The primary thing that they want from their leaders of communication is for people to tell them as it is. Number one, tell us the truth, hold truth up to power. Nobody dares do that. We want you to do that. So these grand purposes, all sound and fury and meaning nothing, are the worst thing that organizations can do. Has to be real, has to be owned, has to be lived, has to be observed. And so that takes us on then to what's at the heart of that. And I would suggest that values-based leadership is the most crucial part of this. And we could spend, you know, a whole day talking about values-based leadership. But why are values such an important thing? And why do they have sort of credence in a situation where leadership and following leaders is a crumbly terrain at the moment? Well, I think that values, particularly in a pluralistic society, and we talk about diversity in the workforce, which is absolutely to be welcomed, but diverse workforces also means that actually their value base is likely to be diverse as well. And, you know, it's not as simple as saying, well, get people to agree to all this. There will be conflicts. And that's to be encouraged in a way, because that means that when you actually devise values, and again, negotiated values within the organization, you come up with a set of common starting points that people can align around. And increasingly, as we know, recruitment is done around values as opposed to functional capabilities. And the thing about values is that they have an elasticity about them. So if I say customer service to you, which is a traditional value, if you like, I can interpret that in a way that is meaningful for me. And it allows me to express my personality when I'm engaging with customers. And if I want to do things an extra mile way, that's fine. You might put a base standard in, but something that, you know, that's established as a value means that it's embracing. Integrity means a whole range of things. For somebody with a deep Muslim or Christian belief, it will mean one thing. For a humanist, it might mean another, but we recognize integrity when we see it. And there's a commonality there that allows personal expression. Rules require compliance. Values require thought. They require people to take ownership of them. And leaders, you know, who demonstrate values through their constant organizational narrative, I think, give a sense for how things are done around here, but also what values are valued within the organization. And the key challenge to legitimacy is values that are espoused are not values lived. And for leaders, and for us, I think as communication leaders, got a responsibility to call out where those legitimacy gaps are. And we have a responsibility more than anybody else within the organization to test those values and to live them ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with having aspirational values, but when the organizational narrative as lived by leaders, and that's the real narrative, folks, not the journalist who writes the nice, neat corporate narrative for us. The narrative of the organization is what it says and does every day. And if that is not filled with values language and values actions, then we have a real challenge. So the other thing about generating the conditions for success is that leadership doesn't reside at the top. It resides in teams, and it resides in empowering teams. And by that means that they are able to take decisions within that sort of broad value base and that broad perspective that purpose gives the organization. And it means, therefore, that the leader's job is to facilitate that release of energy and potential within those teams and to collaborate with them and provide the conditions to allow them to succeed. So what you get through values-based leadership and ethical leadership really is a liberation of innovation. And the sort of didactic hero leader is against that really. It's about do things my way, I'll lead, model me, and everything will be great. Whereas a different type of leadership is you lead. This is what we're trying to achieve together. You're the one at the coalface. You know best. You lead. And as a team, therefore, we'll be able to succeed. And some work done by the Page Society a couple of years ago now, called the CCO, the Chief Communication Officer, as pace setter. And they talk about this whole thing as building corporate character. And I love this phrase. And just as, you know, we have a character, a personal character, what you're doing in building sort of ethical leadership is building a unique corporate brand around your unique set of your unique proposition, your unique set of values, which uniquely you live. And where at every step, at every touch point, the test for you internally for leadership is that the reality that everybody experiences? And corporate culture then is framed around being true to a corporate character, which is the same on the inside as it is on the outside. And, you know, we've had an obsession, and I'm going to fall out with quite a few people in saying this, I know that, on reputation management. And I don't know if you read the piece by Amanda Coleman's fellow Scott a few weeks ago, saying that, you know, we've got to get away from reputation management. And I love this quote from Abraham Lincoln, you know, character is like a tree and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing. And our job as ethical leaders within organization is to fix the trees. And then the shadow, the reputation, will look after itself. Just focusing on on values a little bit more, you might find this is quite a helpful model. It's called the Barrett model of organizational consciousness. It's quite new. If you just Google Barrett model organizational, you get this model. And he's based this on Maslow. And what Barrett says is that, you know, these three levels at the bottom are, you know, what organizations often focus on, which is about viability, performance and reliability, relationships building, which is really important. You've got to build relationships, obviously, with customers and with employees in order to succeed. These are the basic things. And I was just reflecting about how many of our values are actually, that you see in the corporate lexicon of values, are down here. They're almost self-orientated, you know, quality, results, competence, efficiency. Whereas up here, which is about sort of aligning yourself with your external stakeholders and society, this is where organizational purpose resides and where leadership really resides. So being of service, looking to the long term, social responsibility, community involvement, genuine partnership, where you know you're not the lead organization, but you work together. This is leadership. Leadership is understanding the other. It's corporate self-realization comes through actually these intangible areas, not the tangible areas. So I think that's something for us to reflect on, and I'm going to leave these slides with you to do that. So I've been banging on quite a bit about that, but Mary Barra is the only female CEO of a huge motoring organization of General Motors. And so believe her if you don't believe me. To change culture, you have to change behaviors, not about what you say, it's about what you do. It is about furniture. It's about creating an environment for collaboration, giving people the tools. How can we make a working environment enabling and empowering instead of constricting? So sort of new thinking on leadership then. Very quickly, what we've learned from the recent past. I just refer you back to Edelman for the minute. And I think it's really remarkable, actually, that apart from the figure here, it's who people turn to, what that bouncing trust was generated by when we first went into this COVID crisis. Because it's clear that there was an enormous bounce in trust in everybody. So people want to trust. We keep saying, you know, people don't want to trust us anymore. They do. They do, actually. The challenge is, are we trustworthy? And I think this is the issue, really. If they find a reason to trust, they will trust. And these were the sources of trust for them. Credible source of information, employee communication. They look to their employer. The most relied news source was mainstream news. Those with tried and tested credentials, who had the right training, etc. Most trusted spokespeople, doctors and scientists, not seen to have a political stake in the outcome. So let's just have a look at an example from the public sector and private sector about how trust was really generated, because again, there are lessons for ethical leadership. So it was my privilege to do some work with NHS communicators during this period. And they did a strategic and radical shift in priorities during COVID. This is the shift at the bottom here, where you see the green arrow is they focused a huge effort, biggest shift in their work, proportion of their work was providing factual public information. Their second biggest shift was about changes in staff behavior, working on that to keep their staff safe, but also because they realized that they were the route to the local community, because local was most trusted. I think as well, the other striking thing on here is this red arrow. They stopped doing any work on reputation management proactively. And what happened? The reputation of the NHS went through the roof. Why? Possibly because of this and because of this. Yeah. So reputation looks after itself when you do the right thing. And the OECD say that good practice in public sector communication is demonstrating competence and showing your values. And, you know, all the plaudits about the vaccine rollout, we know that this is constantly now in the government narrative. Who delivered that? Well, it was the NHS, the most trusted organisation in the country. So in the private sector, it was a little bit different, and some interesting things here. So maintaining public support was number one priority for the private sector. You can absolutely understand that, because, you know, business continuity is absolutely crucial. But the shift happened when it didn't go beyond that. So yeah, you want us to support you because you want your business to succeed. That's fair enough. You know, we understand all that, but it's got to go beyond that. You've got to make a contribution. Those of you who are sustaining through this need to show that you're committed to your community. Reputation management remained high on the agenda. And again, there are issues around that, you know, reputation management, you know, what does it mean? Because actually what the private sector found, that their reputation was actually judged on how they treated their employees more than anything else. So were they treated fairly? Did the bosses take a bonus where their staff were on were on furlough? You know, and issues of social justice. So did you live your purpose? This was the example par excellence for some organizations about whether their purpose statements meant anything at all. And there's a huge concern about inequalities and how people were expecting the private sector to help others. Just a couple of examples on this. Unilever, I think, was really great. Right at the beginning, it came out with this on its corporate website about how it was going to move to help other people, rather no sign at all about selling products here. 100 million euros donated for soap and sanitizer and food parcels to deprived communities around the world. 500 million euros to sustain its small suppliers and ensure that they had cash flow. Nothing about products. And its reputation rocketed. So there's a thing going on here. But we know actually that ethical actions make financial sense too. I don't think Larry Fink would be so keen on this if it meant that all sorts of organizations were going bust and his investments were going to the wall. But these are the figures. The shift towards sustainable and ethical investment is huge. 96% increase last year. And also the performance of those companies who were acting ethically, sustainably, ESG, outperformed their parent benchmarks, 81% of them. So, I mean, lots of counter examples on this. We know that Anthony Jenkins lost his job because he tried to change the culture of Barclays by trying to re-engender an ethical culture following the Libor scandal. But he didn't look after the financials as well. And this is a balance, folks. You know, we can't just be good for good's sake. You know, we have to perform on the business side as well. But Deliveroo recently questions around the treatment of drivers and companies. You know, this is why that launch didn't succeed. And I mentioned Brewdog earlier. And there is something here, I think, about congruence between what you say on the inside and what you are perceived to do on the outside. And ethical leadership is reducing that gap. I call it the legitimacy gap, what's said on the inside and what's said on the outside, and the narratives that are generated internally and externally. If they don't align, you've got a huge problem coming. And that's a leadership problem. So Tata Steel, what they did during the pandemic is they started doing an intranet, a blog every day for their employees on well-being, a whole load of things that employees were raising with them. And then they made it public. So this is now on Facebook, and it's been, I think, an exemplar really on showing the world the inside, so that then people can make judgments on them. And reputation actually is the judgment the society makes of you, you know. So making sure that that transparency is there, same on the inside as the outside, really important. So, okay, I'm going to just cover off now one or two last things before I shut up. One is about reimagining the post-pandemic organisation. There's a title, there's a paper by McKinsey's called this, and I would recommend it to you. I think it's really good. It's written by 4 of their senior consultants. Their names are at the bottom there. And what McKinsey say, I think, is he's here a blueprint for a communication director. You know, when we reimagine the post-pandemic organisation, right in the middle, we have to consider the black dots there, who we are. So purpose, you know, what we stand for, and how, what's our place in the world? Value, what do we contribute to our stakeholders and to society? And culture, doing the right thing, behaving well, ensuring that values are at the base of everything we do. And then in the darker blue there, these are some things about how we operate. And again, ethics is at the heart of this. If we're going to have flatter, more agile structures, it means that we have to go beyond the hierarchy of bosses. We have to give power to teams. We can't demand things of teams and then take away their right to make decisions. And then how we grow is around sort of how do we develop as a company? And again, as comms people are at the heart of this, creating ecosystems which bring in the outside, as well as networking throughout the organization. We've learned that lesson, haven't we? I've met all sorts of colleagues I've never worked with before during this pandemic, because we've had to build these ecosystems to make things work. And it's been structured through communication and facilitated through communication. Platforms, of course, data-rich, multi-dimensional platforms required for that. And the governance of those are down to us. And then finally, it's about learning. Learning is done through embracing the difference, about talking to each other and acting differently. Similar model that I've come across by these 3 academics. I'll give you the full paper there. But one of the things that's been learned in the public sector is, you know, that closed thinking, which is about we've got all the answers. And that's how a lot of the actions was done by governments, I have to say at the beginning. You know, we know the truth, towards now understanding that things have to be devolved and to be open. And you have to involve all sorts of people, all sorts of partnerships to be successful. And the 3 elements there, transparency, participation, and collaboration, must be at the heart of everything that we do if we're going to move from a system of distrust to trust. So finally, before I just wrap up, and I need to give plenty of time to you for some questions. So next big ethical challenges, I think the biggest one is AI. I'm not going to go through all this because this is your day-to-day work. We know that life online is getting really, really difficult. Life offline, sorry, is getting really, really difficult. I've got a next door neighbour who's 94 and she was unvaccinated for months until very, very recently. I didn't understand why. She can't use the technology. She couldn't get online to book her appointment. So, you know, life offline is getting really, really difficult. We've got all sorts of issues around algorithms and our life choices being narrowed through algorithms and bias and, you know, power given to those who already have power to harness the resources to harness the power of AI. And so I'm not going to go through all this. And you might have come across the CIPR Ethics Guide to Artificial Intelligence, which Sean mentioned earlier, which I was fortunate to play a part in producing. Big issues in AI and big data, very quickly. This is going to change the very nature of society as we know. New society structures, new elites, the nature of human engagement is changing. And we've got issues around the surveillance culture. Workforce is going to massively change. And are we preparing for transition for that in the right place? There are going to be huge swathes of people who need reskilling. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. There'll be new jobs. But what are we going to do with those people in our organizations who say goodbye to it? Just kick them out after years of service? Off you go? That's not ethical leadership. Governance around AI and, you know, what sort of AI systems are put in place. We know we have issues ourselves in our own functional areas of the use of AI. What about organizations? Who knows what the algorithms are? Who's asking those difficult questions about AI systems that are being installed in the organizations? Too important to leave to the techies. And, you know, the nature of the impact on society and ourselves is huge. What of our work's going to be supplemented? How are we going to be supplanted? I tell you, the public relations industry is in for a big shock when we realize the full impact of AI. And much of our work, despite us thinking that it's complex, is actually very routine. So how can we contribute? I'm going to wrap up now with these thoughts. I think that we have a huge role to play in ethical leadership in these three areas. We've got a leadership capability in understanding context, what's going on around us. And I think contextual intelligence is probably the most important contribution that we can make to ethical leadership. What's going on out there? What's acceptable? How is it changing? What are the requirements of us? Helping to design purpose that resonates. Involved in strategy development, bringing that external voice into strategy making. Making our organizations points of meaning for people, not just instrumental transactions, you know, but people getting meaning from us. During the height of the pandemic, you know, employees look to their organizations for meaning and truth. How precious is that? Let's not flitter it away. And future, thinking about the future is really important. Empathy, I'm not going to go through that because empathy has got to be something in ethical leadership, and particularly with AI and data-driven decision-making, the rational emerging again as really important, and of course it is. But if we don't maintain the human, we can't be ethical. And then there is something about the conscience of the organization. There has to be somebody there holding truth up to power, as all this research in Europe has showed about integrity. Just because organizations can use big data to manipulate their customers into buying things they don't really need and they don't even know they're being manipulated, should they? How and building trust. And then very finally, I just show, this is a little model that I designed just a couple of months ago about a sort of a perspective, if you like, for regaining trust. And because ethical leadership really is trust. How do you gain trust? Three elements to this. The first is we need to be really cognizant, I think, as leaders in our organization, as ethical leaders, about the flows of trust. And they're three-way. So first of all, this sort of within the organization, and unless trust is central to the culture of our organization, it will be difficult for members of our organizations to act in ways that will generate trust externally. The narrative they devise will not be, this is a great organization, and it will lack those that congruence I mentioned. And then secondly, there's a flow of trust from inside to the outside of the organization, words and actions that are trustworthy, okay, and that are values-based. And then the flow from the outside to the inside. This entails stakeholders invest their trust, two halves to trust, those who are trustworthy and those who invest trust. So that's about flows of trust. Same thing about trust characteristics. And I would say there are three. First of all, it's about integrity. So acting with honesty, having high standards of probity, being fair and acting from demonstrable moral principles and values. The second is competence. And if I would say the one thing, if we look at this past period that might be said about the public sector, the one thing that they have been judged on, and I won't ever say whether being found wanting or not, is competence. Can you deliver? And ethical leadership requires competence. It's not all lovey-dovey, you know. And then the third part of that is empathy, as I say, speaking and acting with compassion and sensitivity. And then finally, the third dimension is about the trust process, really. How do we do trust? And I would say that's through collaboration, working in partnership, where others are regarded as equal. Be really interesting for you to do a trust audit with your partners and do a balance sheet. How many asks do I make of my partners? And how many gives do I give? And when I've done this in some organization, there's been no discretionary give at all. It's all an ask, okay? And it's about commitment, you know, so even when their back is turned, you're still looking after it, okay? And it's about long term, and it's about sustained. And openness is the last thing. So it's about inclusivity, diversity of opinions, people and options, and different conversations that are welcomed, because that enriches and makes sure that nobody's excluded. I'm going to shut up there, Sean. I've spoken for too long. I do apologise about that. But that's just some thinking really on ethical leadership and some of the dimensions of ethical leadership that I've been thinking about over the last months. I haven't got many answers there for you. These are sort of themes that I think are rich themes for us to develop and continue to talk about as we meet the challenge ourselves as ethical leadership. And one of the things that's really come home to me, and I have to say kudos to you guys, is how communication has come front and central in organizations over these last months. Yeah. And we need to hang on to that and move forward on that. And I think we've got a golden opportunity now to take the central seat in ethical leadership. And thank you for listening to my ramblings.
Thank you so much. I think you've given us so much to think about. I was really struck by what you spoke about in terms of trying to find that human truth of organizational purpose, and also some of the stuff that you mentioned about societal impact, and also those changes that are to come around AI and the potential impact that will have for the industry. But I see there are some questions already coming through. So we have one here, which was, have you had any experiences or perhaps examples of calling out the legitimacy gap? And if so, how did that go down? This person says, I think fear of repercussion holds a lot of people back.
Yeah, absolutely right. And maybe one of the things that I should have mentioned is that courage, you know, in ethical leadership is a nice word to use, and sometimes, you know, you're jelly on the inside. What this is sometimes, I think, when an external person or working with somebody else can really help, because you need to protect yourselves. I'm very aware of that. One of the things that I've done with a couple of organizations, well, actually more than 2 organizations, I've done a sort of values audit with them. So we've put the values around a spidergram, you know, whether it's 4 or 6 of their values. And then we've asked different stakeholder groups to rate them on these values. And what you find is that there's all sorts of gaps. And then they've said it. You've not said it. They've said it. Okay. And then you can use that as a fantastic tool to open up rich conversations about, well, how is it that this group think we're okay on this value, but that group doesn't? Or we're clear, everybody thinks we're absolute crap at this. So what's going on here? You know, we're not living this. Should we chuck that out as a value? Or what is it about our culture that means that this value cannot be lived? So I've actually found it, the most difficult people to talk to are not the board, actually. They're the people just under board level who are far too invested in keeping things often as they are because they want to get to the top of the ladder. But working with somebody else, getting others to tell your story, I'd say is a really good way of looking at that legitimacy gap. And I'd say that values audit is a good way to do it. The evidence is there, you know, and it's a good practical way to do it. And yeah, some people do get very defensive, but most people have said, you know, we need to fix this.
think that's very good advice and a very useful tool as well when it comes to those discussions. I have another question here, Anne, which is, which leaders should we be using as examples of best practice when it comes to ethical leadership? I don't know if there's anyone that stands out for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Because we only see leaders in their public face normally. But I would say, I mean, somebody who's really stood out for me is Jacinda Ardern. I know she's a political person, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she's got, I mean, she is a graduate in communication, as you know. So, I suppose we expect the best of those, but she is a CEO of a country. And also Angela Merkel, I think she's similar. It's interesting, isn't it, how the female leaders have really come out in this pandemic. And what they have is this wonderful mix of being honest with people, straight with them, telling us it is, New Zealand's been locked down basically, for a year. Well, they're not locked down now, but they've been so tight. Nobody can travel from New Zealand or go to it, for a year and a half now. And people have held fast to that. But what Jacinda Ardern did, she was very clear for the reasons, but she also has that amazing empathy. She comes across as a person who is with the people, not telling them. She's one of them. She's in her pajamas telling the nation, she just put her kids to bed and talking to them about what life in lockdown is like for her with a young child, So she talks with them. She doesn't talk at them. And she acts with honesty, integrity, and empathy. And I think those are the leaders really that are now, I think, showing themselves to be the most effective ones. I think your own leader, Nicola Sturgeon, whatever you think about Nicola as a political figure, she's got that great communication ability of being rational, but also empathy as well. And some of the leaders that are coming through now, I think, from industry. If you look at somebody like Richard Walker of Iceland, he tells it as it is. He doesn't mince words at all. But he shows, and I've heard Richard speak in more personal, platforms where he can be asked quite personal questions. And I know his staff adores him because he really cares about them and he talks to them. So those are the sorts of leaders, I think, now who are gaining traction.
Some really good examples, yeah.
Right?
Definitely some really good examples, politics aside, for sure.
Yeah, and as well, what Unilever is. Unilever has made huge strides over this last few years, and I think it's now beginning to, selling off those brands, some of them hugely profitable, that don't actually align with its purpose, and they're not looking for. They're saying we're only going to sell things that are sustainable and actually live to our purpose. I was very struck, actually. I don't know if any of you were listening to Radio 4 this morning. I actually wrote it down. Let me just read it. There was a guy on there who is the managing director of DeepMind, they sold out to Google about, a few years ago. And he gave his purpose, which is to understand AI, to advance science and to the benefit of humanity. And I looked up about the guy there who, Demis Hassabis is his name. And he forced Google to set up an ethics committee, which is now functioning, before he would allow DeepMind to join. Because he said, AI is it's such a potent force that I want to know that this is going to be used for the benefit of science and humanity before I will sell to you. So, that's about purpose. And he was talking openly this morning about the need for regulation and calling out bad practice and misuse. So there we go. Yeah.
And I'm going to move on because there are a couple more questions, if that's all right. The first is, how difficult is it to regain trust if it has been lost or damaged previously? No organisation, even the NHS, starts from a blank slate. So what does the ongoing process look like? It's quite an interesting one.
It's a real toughie, and I suppose it depends how much trust you've lost. just a couple of observations there very quickly. First of all, we all make mistakes. And if you do, fess up, apologise genuinely, make reparation, move on. And a lot is forgiven, just as we, for individuals, say, I'm sorry, got it wrong. This is what I'll do to put it right, move on. If you lose trust completely, some organisations rebrand because they know it's irretrievable. We think of AstraZeneca at the moment as terrible position that they're in, you know, where they're doing all the right things. They're not making profit out of this drug, and yet they've got this issue about, you know, blood clotting. Some of the other drugs have got issue. They've not talked. They don't talk. And you need to talk about these things. You need to be humble. You need to listen to what people are saying, and you need to respond in a way that shows that you're humble and to accept that there's something wrong here. Sometimes it's irretrievable and you need to rebrand. So it depends on the level, but much is forgiven of those who are humble.
Power of openness. Yep. There's a last question here from our audience, Anne, which is, you mentioned the ESG and sustainability element in building trust and legitimacy, but it seems like there are a number of brands that are putting that to the test. So things like Amazon and Primark, for example. Is that something we should be aware of as leaders? I wonder if that's about kind of that balance of doing what you say or saying what you do, rather.
Yeah, it's a really complex area. I think there's quite a lot of purpose washing going on, just as there's greenwashing and everything else. You know, I think purpose comes to the fore in a crisis, or where you've got an opportunity to make a pile of money in an organisation and you say no because it doesn't suit your purpose. Again, this research I was looking at from Europe was saying that, you know, we've got to get to a position where we're prepared to say no and it hurts. That's when purpose is meaningful. So yeah, everybody's got a purpose at the moment. BlackRock require those people that they invest in to have purpose statements and to have statements about how they're going to treat their employees and their recruitment models into the future. The test comes in crisis. And yeah, you need to have a purpose, but unless it's something that you can really live to, you're probably better not to have one. Just to say this is what we're good at.
It's probably quite a good point for us to end on today. But thank you so much again, Anne, for joining us. But before we go, I'd just like to highlight that we do have another event coming up in the next few weeks. And that's our Meet the Influencer event with Laura Young, who you might know as Less Waste Laura. She's going to be talking about greener life hacks on the 16th of September. And that one's on Eventbrite now if you do want to attend. But for now, I'd just like to thank Anne once again and thank all of you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you at another event very soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sean.